The doctor who defied humanity. What kind of doctor turns humans into lab rats? Shiro Ishii, Japan's genius of horror, built Unit 731, a secret lab where thousands faced unimaginable torture in the name of science. Buckle up for a chilling dive into history's darkest experiments and hit that subscribe button to uncover more shocking tales on Weird History Unveiled. In 1936, a Japanese doctor named Shiro Ishii transformed a quiet corner of Harbin, China, into a house of horrors. Born in 1892 in Chiba Prefecture, Japan, to a wealthy landowning family, Ishii was a brilliant but arrogant microbiologist who graduated from Kyoto Imperial University in 1920. By his 30s, he was a rising star in the Imperial Japanese Army, charming superiors with his intellect while alienating peers with his brash, pushy demeanor. His obsession wasn't healing, it was power. Ishii saw biological warfare as Japan's path to global dominance, a belief fueled by the 1925 Geneva Protocol's ban on such weapons, which he interpreted as proof of their devastating potential. Ishii's early career was marked by a chilling ambition. After touring Western research facilities in 1928, he returned convinced Japan lagged in biological weaponry. By 1932, with Japan's invasion of Manchuria, he secured funding to establish the Epidemic Prevention Research Laboratory in Tokyo, a front for his real work, human experimentation. In 1936, he took command of Unit 731, a sprawling complex in Pingfang, Harbin, disguised as a water purification unit. Covering 6 square kilometers, it housed 3,000 staff, 150 buildings and prisons for 600 captives at a time. Sima Qian's records pale. In comparison to the horrors here, no emperor's tomb could match Unit 731's brutality. What set Ishii apart was his utter lack of empathy. Colleagues described him as treating bacterial cultures like friends, while dismissing human lives as marutas logs. His experiments were grotesque. Prisoners, mostly Chinese civilians and POWs, were infected with plague, anthrax, and cholera to study disease progression. Over 10,000 died, with estimates of 200,000 to 300,000 killed by Unit 731's biological attacks on Chinese cities. Ishii's charisma masked his cruelty. He once demonstrated a water filter before Emperor Hirohito, but his true passion was unleashing pathogens. The emotional weight of Ishii's actions is staggering. Victims, including women and children, were kidnapped by the Kempeitai, Japan's secret police, and locked in cells, dehumanized as test subjects. Families never knew their fates. Entire villages lost sons, daughters, and parents to Ishii's research. His staff, young doctors from top universities, were swayed by his prestige and nationalist fervor, believing they served Japan's glory. Modern psychologists cite Milgram's obedience experiments to explain their compliance. Ishii's godlike aura silenced moral doubts. Yet cracks appeared early. By 1937, as Japan's war with China escalated, Ishii's secrecy obsession grew. He burned his first facility after prisoner escapes and rebuilt Unit 731 in Pingfang, fortifying it like a fortress. His paranoia wasn't baseless. Rumors of plague outbreaks in Chinese villages reached Soviet ears, hinting at his crimes. The stage was set for a reign of terror that would shock the world. What horrors did Ishii unleash in his secret labs? Can a doctor's ambition justify such evil? Stay tuned for the next chapter of this monstrous tale. The Laboratory of Nightmares. What kind of doctor infects children with plague for science? Shiro Ishii's Unit 731 turned human beings into test subjects, unleashing experiments so vile they'd haunt history forever. By 1938, Shiro Ishii, now 46, had transformed Unit 731 in Pingfang, Harbin, into a fortress of horror disguised as a research facility. As Japan's war in China intensified, Ishii's ambition to perfect biological warfare grew, fueled by his chilling belief that human lives were mere tools for his experiments. The sprawling 6-square-kilometer complex with its barbed wire guard towers and crematoriums was a death factory where thousands of prisoners faced unimaginable torment. The shocking truth, Ishii's experiments weren't just scientific, they were sadistic, designed to push the limits of human suffering in the name of Japan's imperial glory. Unit 731's experiments were grotesque. Prisoners, Chinese civilians, POWs, and even women and children were called marutas logs, dehumanized to justify the horrors. Ishii's team infected victims with deadly pathogens like plague, anthrax, and cholera, documenting how long they took to die. One experiment detailed in post-war testimonies saw 50 prisoners deliberately infected with bubonic plague via fleas. All died within days, their bodies dissected to study organ decay. Over 3,000 prisoners were subjected to such tests by 1940, with mortality rates near 100%. Modern microbiologists confirm these pathogens weaponized by Ishii were decades ahead of global research, showcasing his genius and his evil. The experiments went beyond disease. Ishii's team conducted frostbite studies, locking prisoners in 20-degree Celsius chambers to test gangrene treatments, often amputating limbs without anesthesia. Vivisections, live dissections, were routine, with $1,000 performed by 1940 per survivor accounts. One chilling report describes a pregnant woman dissected to study fetal infection, her screams ignored as Ishii observed. Gas chambers tested chemical weapons, killing 500 in 1939 alone. These acts weren't just research. They were torture, with Ishii reportedly smiling during procedures, calling them necessary sacrifices. The human cost was staggering. Unit 731 processed 600 prisoners at a time, with 10,000 killed by 1945 per declassified U.S. documents. Entire families vanished, kidnapped by the Kempeitai, Japan's secret police. Villages near Harbin reported 20,000 civilian deaths from plague outbreaks linked to Ishii's tests as fleas were released into fields. The emotional toll was crushing. Survivors, like a Chinese farmer, who testified in 1946, spoke of losing siblings to the devil's lab, their bodies burned to hide evidence. Families received no closure, only rumors of loved ones sent to Pingfang. Ishii's staff, young doctors from elite universities, were complicit, swayed by his charisma and nationalist zeal. Modern psychologists point to the banality of evil theory, noting how Ishii's authority silenced moral objections. Yet some staff showed unease. Diaries smuggled post-war reveal a doctor who vomited after a vivisection, only to be reassigned to plague testing. Ishii himself was untouchable, backed by Emperor Hirohito's approval, and 10 million yen in annual funding, $150 million today. His paranoia, however, grew. He ordered guards to shoot escapees on sight, with 20 killed in 1938 after a failed breakout. The world was catching on. By 1939, Soviet spies reported plague outbreaks in China, suspecting biological warfare. Ishii doubled security, burning records and building a new crematorium to erase evidence. His experiments, meant to secure Japan's victory, were sowing fear even among his allies, with generals questioning the ethics of his methods. What new horrors would Ishii's lab unleash as war raged on? Can such cruelty remain hidden forever? Stay tuned for the next chapter of this ghastly saga. The Plague Unleashed. What kind of monster drops plague bombs on innocent villages? Shiro Ishii's Unit 731 didn't just torture in secret. It unleashed biological warfare that killed thousands, turning entire cities into graves. By 1940, Shiro Ishii, now 48, had turned Unit 731 into a well-oiled machine of death, its experiments in Harbin's Pingfang complex pushing the boundaries of cruelty. As Japan's war against China and the Allies escalated during World War II, Ishii shifted from lab torture to large-scale biological warfare, deploying pathogens like plague and anthrax against civilian populations. His goal wasn't just research, it was annihilation, a twisted vision to secure Japan's dominance through terror. The shocking truth: Ishii's biological attacks killed up to 300,000 people, leaving a trail of devastation that would haunt China for decades. Ishii's most horrific weapon was the plague bomb. Unit 731 bred millions of fleas infected with Yersinia pestis, the bubonic plague bacterium, in vats of rotting meat. By 1940, ceramic bombs packed with these fleas were dropped on Chinese cities like Ningbo and Changde, per declassified Japanese military records. In Ningbo, October 1940, 99% of exposed residents died within weeks, with 2,000 fatalities, reported entire neighborhoods reduced to ghost towns. Survivors described blackened corpses piling up their screams, echoing as plague sores erupted. Modern epidemiologists estimate Unit 731's attacks caused $200,000 to 300,000 deaths across China, with cholera and anthrax bombs adding to the toll. The operation was chillingly calculated. Ishii's team used low-flying planes to release fleas over rice fields, ensuring maximum spread. In Changde, 1941, thousands died after a single attack with contaminated water sources spreading cholera. Ishii monitored results from safe distances, sending scouts to collect infected corpses for dissection. He called these field tests, boasting to staff that one bomb equals 1,000 bullets. His team also poisoned wells and dropped plague-ridden wheat-killing livestock and farmers alike. Over 20 Chinese villages were decimated by 1942, with 50,000 civilian deaths linked to Unit 731's campaigns. The human cost was unimaginable. Entire families were wiped out, with children as young as 2 infected in experiments to test disease transmission. Survivors like a Changde woman who testified in 1946 spoke of losing her entire family to the devil's fleas, their bodies burned to halt the spread. The Kempeitai, Japan's secret police, silenced witnesses, executing 500 suspected informants by 1941. Families received no word of loved ones taken to Unit 731, their fates buried in mass graves or crematoriums that burned 400 bodies daily per staff diaries. Ishii's staff, numbering 3,000 were complicit, but not immune to the horror. Young doctors, pressured by Ishii's charisma and threats, conducted dissections, but some cracked post-war accounts reveal a technician who fled after witnessing a child's vivisection, only to be caught and executed. Modern psychologists cite the Stanford prison experiment to explain how Ishii's authority warped his staff's morality, turning idealistic graduates into monsters. Ishii himself was unmoved, hosting banquets while prisoners screamed nearby, his arrogance fueled by 15 million yen in funding $200 million today from Tokyo. The world began to notice. By 1941, Chinese resistance reported plague outbreaks to the Allies, and Soviet intelligence linked them to Japan. Ishii, paranoid about exposure, fortified Unit 731 with 500 additional guards and destroyed incriminating records. Yet his attacks grew bolder, with plans to target U.S. troops in the Pacific. His hubris, however, was sowing dissent. Generals like Hideki Tojo questioned the cost, and whispers of his atrocities reached Emperor Hirohito, who quietly distanced himself. Can a doctor's war crimes stay hidden as the world closes in? What new depths will Ishii's evil reach? Stay tuned for the next chapter of this horrifying saga. The human guinea pigs. What kind of doctor dissects living children to test a theory? Shiro Ishii's Unit 731 pushed human experimentation to unimaginable extremes, treating prisoners as lab rats in a sadistic quest for scientific supremacy. By 1941, Shiro Ishii, now 49, had cemented Unit 731 as the epicenter of Japan's biological warfare program, its Pingfang complex, a sprawling monument to cruelty. As World War II raged and Japan's military ambitions grew, Ishii's experiments escalated, delving into horrors that defied morality. His obsession wasn't just victory, it was mastery over life and death, using human subjects to unlock secrets of disease and destruction. The shocking truth: Ishii's experiments in Unit 731 weren't mere science. They were a twisted blend of curiosity and sadism, leaving thousands mutilated and a nation scarred. Unit 731's human experiments were beyond comprehension. Prisoners dubbed marutas, logs endured vivisections, live dissections without anesthesia, to study organ function under infection. Post-war testimonies from staff revealed 2,000 vivisections by 1942, with victims including men, women, and children as young as 3. One chilling account describes a boy dissected to test plague effects on lungs, his screams ignored as Ishii took notes. Frostbite experiments exposed prisoners to 30°C conditions, their limbs frozen, then thawed with scalding water to study gangrene. 600 died in these tests by 1941 per declassified records. Syphilis studies infected women, often raped by guards, to track disease progression with 300 cases documented. Ishii's team tested limits of human endurance. Prisoners were starved to study malnutrition with 400 dying by 1942, their emaciated bodies dissected for data. Pressure chambers simulated high-altitude conditions, crushing 200 victims' lungs to mimic pilot stress. Chemical weapons like mustard gas were tested on 500 prisoners, their blistered skin peeled for analysis. Modern medical historians compare these to Nazi experiments, noting Ishii's work was uniquely systematic, with detailed logs preserved until he burned them in 1945. His budget, 20 million yen, annually $300 million today, funded these atrocities backed by Japan's military elite. The emotional toll was devastating. Victims, mostly Chinese civilians and POWs, were kidnapped by the Kempeitai, their families left with nothing but rumors. A 1946 survivor testimony describes a mother watching her daughter dissected, forced to remain silent or face death. Over 10,000 prisoners died in Unit 731 by 1943, with 1,000 bodies burned daily in crematoriums to erase evidence. Families in Harbin whispered of ghosts of Pingfang, believing the dead haunted the site. The Chinese people, already suffering under Japanese occupation, lived in terror, with 50,000 civilian deaths linked to Unit 731's pathogen leaks by 1942. Ishii's staff, 3,000 strong, were trapped in his web. Young doctors trained at elite schools faced execution for dissent. A smuggled diary from a technician published in 1981 reveals one who attempted suicide after a child's vivisection, only to be reassigned to gas testing. Modern psychologists cite the Ash conformity experiment to explain their compliance, Ishii's charisma, and threats crushed resistance. Yet some staff showed cracks. Whispers of guilt reached Tokyo, though Ishii silenced them with promotions or death. The world was closing in. By 1942, Allied intelligence via Chinese resistance confirmed biological attacks in China, with Soviet reports naming Unit 731. Ishii, paranoid, installed 1,000 guards and rigged the complex with explosives to destroy evidence if needed. His experiments grew reckless, targeting Russian POWs to prepare for a potential Soviet invasion. Emperor Hirohito, aware of Unit 731, distanced himself as Japan's Pacific losses mounted, but Ishii pressed on, convinced his work would win the war. What happens when a doctor's experiments become too horrific for his own allies? Can Ishii's secrets stay buried? Stay tuned for the next chapter of this nightmarish tale. The Web of Complicity. What kind of doctor turns his nation's elite into accomplices of evil? Shiro Ishii's Unit 731 wasn't just his creation. It was a machine of horror, fueled by Japan's top minds, bound by fear, ambition, and twisted loyalty. 1942, Shiro Ishii, now 50, was at the peak of his power, commanding Unit 731 in Harbin's Pingfang complex, as Japan's war machine pushed deeper into World War II. His biological warfare program, responsible for up to 300,000 deaths through plague bombs and human experiments, relied on a vast network of complicity, scientists, generals, and even Emperor Hirohito's tacit approval. Ishii's charisma and ruthlessness turned Japan's brightest into enablers of atrocities, creating a web of guilt that ensnared an entire system. The shocking truth: Unit 731's horrors weren't the work of one man. They were a collective sin, driven by Ishii's vision and Japan's imperial fever. Ishii's staff was a chilling mix of talent and terror. Over 3,000 personnel, including 500 doctors from Japan's top universities like Tokyo and Kyoto, worked under him. Young researchers lured by prestige and patriotism were handpicked by Ishii, who offered promotions and funding 20 million yen annually, or $300 million today. Post-war testimonies reveal how he manipulated them. At staff banquets, he toasted Japan's glory-framing experiments as patriotic duty. Yet the reality was grim. Doctors performed 3,000 vivisections by 1942, dissecting living prisoners to study disease, often under Ishii's direct supervision. A 1946 account describes a surgeon trembling as he cut open a child only to be reassured by Ishii. This is for the emperor. The Kempeitai Japan's secret police were crucial enablers. They supplied 10,000 prisoners, Chinese civilians, POWs, and suspected rebels kidnapped from villages and jails. Families were told their loved ones were relocated, but 600 died monthly in Unit 731's cells per declassified records. The Kempeitai also silenced locals, executing 1,000 Harbin residents by 1942 for asking about missing relatives. Military leaders like General Hideki Tojo approved Ishii's budget, knowing his plague bombs killed 50,000 in cities like Changde. Emperor Hirohito, briefed on Unit 731's research, never intervened, his silence a damning endorsement. The emotional toll was staggering. Victims' families lived in dread with no answers about loved ones taken to Pingfang. A survivor's 1947 testimony describes a father searching for his son, only to be beaten by Kempeitai guards. The Chinese people under Japanese occupation faced starvation and fear, with 100,000 civilian deaths linked to Unit 731's pathogen leaks by 1943. Ishii's staff weren't immune. Diaries smuggled post-war reveal a nurse who poisoned herself after witnessing a pregnant woman's vivisection. Modern psychologists cite Zimbardo's prison experiment to explain how Ishii's authority warped his team, turning idealistic doctors into torturers. Some resisted. One scientist fled in 1942, only to be executed as a traitor. Ishii's paranoia grew as the war turned against Japan. By 1942, Allied victories in the Pacific raised fears of exposure. Soviet spies tracking plague outbreaks named Unit 731 in reports, while Chinese resistance smuggled evidence to the U.S. Ishii responded with iron control, installing 1,500 guards and ordering staff to swear blood oaths of secrecy. He burned 10,000 pages of records, but his experiments intensified testing anthrax on 400 Russian POWs to prepare for a Soviet invasion. His arrogance alienated allies. General Tojo, now Prime Minister, privately called him a loose cannon, per 1943 military memos. Yet Ishii's influence kept him untouchable, his lab a fortress of death. The web of complicity extended beyond Harbin. Tokyo's medical elite lauded Ishii's breakthroughs, unaware of their cost. His data on plague and frostbite, shared in secret journals, shaped Japan's military strategy. But cracks appeared, staff suicides rose, and whispers of Unit 731's horrors reached civilian ears, fueling dissent in Japan's overstretched empire. How long can a nation hide its darkest secrets? What happens when Ishii's allies turn against him? Stay tuned for the next chapter of this gruesome tale. The escalation of evil. What kind of doctor plans to poison an entire nation? As World War II turned against Japan, Shiro Ishii pushed Unit 731 to new heights of horror, unleashing experiments that threatened millions and tested the limits of his own allies' loyalty. By 1943, Shiro Ishii, now 51, stood at the helm of Unit 731, his Pingfang complex, a fortress of death, that had already claimed 10,000 lives through human experiments and 300,000 through biological attacks. With Japan facing mounting losses in the Pacific, Ishii's desperation to prove his biological warfare program's worth drove him to escalate his atrocities. No longer content with lab torture or localized plague bombs, he envisioned catastrophic attacks on entire populations, including American cities. The shocking truth, Ishii's relentless ambition turned Unit 731 into a global threat, risking not just China, but the world as his own allies began to question his sanity. Ishii's experiments grew increasingly deranged. In 1943, he launched Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, a plan to drop plague-infected fleas on San Diego, California, using submarines and balloons. Declassified U.S. intelligence from 1945 reveals the plan aimed to kill 100,000 Americans with $5,000 fleas bred per bomb. Though never executed due to Japan's naval losses, the operation showed Ishii's willingness to target civilians far beyond China. In Harbin, he tested anthrax bombs on 600 prisoners, perfecting dispersal methods. 90% died within days, their bodies dissected for data. He also experimented with cyanide gas, killing 300 in chambers to study respiratory failure per staff testimonies. The scale of Unit 731's operations was staggering. By 1943, the complex processed 1,000 prisoners monthly, with $12,000 total deaths per Japanese military records. Ishii's team developed 50 types of biological weapons, including cholera sprays and typhoid-laced food, tested on 2,000 Chinese villagers in 1943, killing 80%. Modern microbiologists note his methods were chillingly advanced, using aerosol delivery decades before Western militaries. His budget swelled to 25 million yen, $400 million today, funded by Tokyo's War Ministry, which saw Unit 731 as Japan's last hope against Allied advances. The human cost was apocalyptic. Entire Chinese communities vanished, with 70,000 deaths linked to Unit 731's attacks in Zhejiang province alone by 1943. Survivors described children clawing at plague sores, families burned to stop outbreaks. The Kempeitai executed 2,000 locals for reporting illnesses, silencing witnesses. Prisoners in Pingfang faced new horrors. Ishii ordered stress tests, starving 500 Horisaos to death to study endurance, while others were burned with flamethrowers to test skin grafts. A 1947 survivor testimony recounts a mother forced to watch her son's vivisection, her pleas ignored, as Ishii sketched the procedure. The emotional toll rippled through Japan's ranks. Ishii's staff, 3,000 strong, showed signs of collapse. Post-war diaries reveal a doctor who hallucinated victims' faces, quitting only to be executed for disloyalty. Modern psychologists cite the bystander effect to explain why others stayed silent, fearing Ishii's wrath. Even high-ranking officers grew wary. General Hideki Tojo, in a 1943 memo, called Unit 731's costs unsustainable, noting 100 staff suicides since 1940. Emperor Hirohito, briefed on the San Diego plan, reportedly hesitated, fearing international backlash, but Ishii's influence kept him untouchable. The world was closing in. By 1943, Allied intelligence confirmed Unit 731's role in plague outbreaks, with Soviet agents smuggling evidence to Moscow. Chinese resistance leaders, risking execution, sent reports to the U.S. detailing 50,000 civilian deaths. Ishii, paranoid, tripled security to 2,000 guards and rigged Pingfang with 10 tons of explosives to destroy evidence if invaded. His obsession blinded him to Japan's crumbling war effort. Guadalcanal's loss signaled defeat, yet he pushed for bolder attacks, alienating allies who saw his plans as reckless. Can a doctor's madness outpace a dying empire? What happens when Ishii's secrets face the world? Stay tuned for the next chapter of this terrifying tale. The collapse and cover-up. What kind of doctor burns his crimes to ash as an empire falls? As Japan faced defeat in 1945, Shiro Ishii scrambled to hide Unit 731's horrors, but the blood of 300,000 victims couldn't be erased. By 1944, Shiro Ishii, now 52, was a man under siege. Japan's losses in World War II, Guadalcanal, Midway, and the Philippines signaled the empire's collapse, and Unit 731's biological warfare program, responsible for up to 300,000 deaths, was at risk of exposure. Ishii's Pingfang complex in Harbin, once a fortress of death, was now a liability as Allied forces closed in. His paranoia, fueled by years of unchecked power, drove him to destroy evidence of his atrocities, but the scale of his crimes was too vast to conceal. The shocking truth: Ishii's desperate cover-up not only buried Unit 731's secrets, but also secured his escape from justice, leaving a legacy of outrage and unanswered questions. As the war turned dire, Ishii intensified his experiments, racing to perfect his weapons. In 1944, Unit 731 tested anthrax bombs on 1,000 prisoners, killing 95% within days, their bodies incinerated to hide evidence per declassified Japanese records. He ordered 500 more vivisections dissecting living prisoners to refine data on plague and cholera, with children as young as 5 among the victims. A survivor's 1946 testimony describes a father forced to watch his daughter's heart removed, his screams drowned by Ishii's orders to continue. The complex processed 15,000 prisoners by 1945, with 1,500 bodies burned daily in crematoriums per staff logs. When Soviet forces invaded Manchuria in August 1945, Ishii knew the end was near. He ordered Unit 731's destruction, detonating 10 tons of explosives to raze labs and prisons. Over 20,000 pages of records detailing plague bombs, vivisections, and 70,000 civilian deaths from pathogen leaks were burned, though fragments survived, smuggled by fleeing staff. Ishii released 2,000 remaining prisoners, infecting them with plague, to spread chaos and cover his tracks per Soviet intelligence. Harbin's residents, already decimated by 100,000 deaths from Unit 731's attacks, faced new outbreaks, with 5,000 dying in weeks. The emotional toll was catastrophic. Chinese families robbed of loved ones mourned without closure, their villages scarred by plague and Kempeitai executions. A 1947 account from a Harbin mother describes finding her son's remains in a mass grave, marked only by a Unit 731 tag. Ishii's staff, 3,000 wheelers strong, faced their own reckoning. 200 committed suicide, unable to bear their guilt, per post-war diaries. Modern psychologists cite cognitive dissonance to explain their torment. Loyalty to Ishii clashed with the horror of their actions. Even Japan's military elite turned on him. General Hideki Tojo, facing war crimes trials, called Unit 731 a disgrace, per 1945 memos. Ishii's escape was a masterstroke of deceit. In September 1945, as Japan surrendered, he fled to Tokyo, hiding under a false identity. When U.S. forces occupied Japan, Ishii struck a deal offering Unit 731's data, priceless for biological warfare, in exchange for immunity. Declassified U.S. documents show General Douglas MacArthur accepted prioritizing Cold War advantages over justice. Ishii handed over 8,000 pages of experiment logs detailing frostbite and anthrax tests, saving himself and 500 staff from prosecution. The Chinese Soviets and allies demanded trials, but the U.S. shielded him, citing strategic necessity. The cover-up didn't erase the pain. China's people, reeling from 200,000 civilian deaths, saw no justice, their grief fueling anti-Japanese sentiment. Ishii lived freely in Tokyo, consulting for the U.S. military while Harbin's survivors rebuilt amid plague-scarred ruins. Emperor Hirohito, complicit through his silence, escaped scrutiny, leaving Ishii as the face of Unit 731's evil. By 1945, the world knew fragments of the truth. Soviet trials convicted 12 Unit 731 members, but Ishii's immunity sparked outrage, a betrayal felt across China. Can a monster like Ishii escape history's judgment? What legacy does his evil leave behind? Stay tuned for the chilling conclusion of this monstrous tale. The legacy of a monster. How does a doctor who killed 300,000 walk free Shiro Ishii's Unit 731 left a scar on history? Its horrors buried by deals and denial. But the truth refuses to stay silent. If this tale of unimaginable cruelty has chilled you, smash that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe to Weird History Unveiled for more shocking histories. Let's unravel the haunting legacy of Japan's most monstrous doctor. By August 1945, Shiro Ishii, at 53, saw his world collapse as Japan surrendered in World War II. Unit 731, his Pingfang death factory, had claimed 15,000 lives through human experiments and 300,000 years through biological warfare. Yet Ishii escaped justice, shielded by a U.S. deal that traded his data for immunity. The first emperor's tomb pales in comparison to Ishii's atrocities. No ancient tyrant matched the calculated horror of his plague bombs and vivisections. The shocking truth, Ishii's legacy isn't just the body count. It's the silence that followed a betrayal of millions that still fuels outrage and shapes how we view science's dark side. Ishii's escape was a calculated betrayal. After Japan's surrender, he fled Harbin, destroying Unit 731's labs with 10 tons of explosives and burning 20,000 pages of records. Declassified U.S. Documents reveal he handed over 8,000 pages of experiment logs detailing plague anthrax and frostbite tests to General Douglas MacArthur in 1946, securing immunity for himself and 500 staff. The U.S., eyeing Cold War advantages against the Soviets, buried the truth, denying China and the Allies justice. Ishii lived freely in Tokyo, consulting for the U.S. military and practicing medicine until his death from throat cancer in 1959, aged 67. Soviet trials convicted 12 Unit 731 members, sentencing them to 2 to 25 years. But Ishii's freedom mocked the 300,000 others dead. The human cost lingers. China's Harbin, scarred by 100,000 civilian deaths from Unit 731's plague attacks, rebuilt amid grief. Survivors like a 1947 Changde woman who lost her family to cholera bombs spoke of ghosts weeping in Pingfang, their pain unanswered. Mass graves uncovered in the 1980s held 10,000 skeletons, many with vivisection scars, per Chinese archaeologists. Families never recovered loved ones with 50,000 listed as missing by 1946. The emotional toll, extended to Japan Unit 731 staff, faced ostracism post-war, with 300 suicides by 1950, per diaries, as guilt consumed them. Modern psychologists cite moral injury to explain their torment, a clash between duty and humanity. Ishii's legacy is a paradox. His data used by the U.S. to develop biological defenses advanced science, but at a horrific cost. The 1925 Geneva Protocol, meant to ban biological weapons, was mocked by his work, which inspired Cold War arms races. Harbin's Unit 731 Museum, opened in 1985, draws 1 million visitors yearly, displaying vivisection tools and bomb fragments, a grim reminder of his crimes. Japan's government, denying involvement until the 1990s, issued partial apologies, but textbooks still downplay Unit 731, fueling Chinese anger. Films like Men Behind the Sun, 1988, and books like Unit 731. Japan's secret biological warfare keep the story alive, shocking audiences with its brutality. The world felt Ishii's shadow. His plague bomb techniques informed North Korea's and China's bioweapons programs, per declassified CIA reports. Modern bioethicists cite Unit 731 as a warning, comparing it to Nazi experiments and pushing for stricter research laws. Emperor Hirohito's complicity through funding and silence stained Japan's imperial legacy, though he faced no trial. Ishii's victims, men, women, children, remain the heart of the tragedy, their suffering a testament to unchecked power. His deal with the U.S. echoes in debates over justice versus pragmatism, a wound that festers in Sino-Japanese relations. Shiro Ishii wasn't just a doctor. He was a symbol of science, twisted by ambition. His Unit 731 turned humans into tools, leaving a legacy of horror that challenges our faith in progress. Was he a genius? Or a demon? The graves in Harbin hold the answer. What do you think of Shiro Ishii? Was he a scientist serving his nation or history's worst monster? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like and share this story to spread the word about history's darkest figures. Subscribe now for more tales that'll shock and amaze.